Hi, I'm Cordelia for the 45, and today we are absolutely delighted to be chatting with the incredible singer-songwriter and recording artist, Nikki, who we're so glad to have with us. Thank you for your time. How are you, Nikki?
I'm good. I am in Jakarta, just spending some time with family. So it's been great.
You've had a really exciting and busy couple of months in the lead up to now. You played Coachella. You then dropped the news that you'll be putting out a very highly anticipated new album, and you shared a couple of the tracks with us. So how has that all been up till now?
It has been a whirlwind. I can't lie. I think I texted my manager that I was thinking of sort of putting this together. I don't think that was a full year ago. I think it was like 8 months ago. So it has been really jam-packed, and it's been so great though. I personally love being the feeling of being busy.
It must feel especially special given that you're being busy doing sort of like completing the circle on a really long-standing body of work, which I'd love to get into now, your upcoming sophomore album, Nicole. So I have to say, when the announcement came from you that you were dropping this, my heart just like leapt out of my chest. And if you like comb through the thousands of comments under that, you will see mine in there being like, oh my God. Because I never comment on like, artist stuff. But I was just like, I had to, because this means so much to those of us who have been your fans since like you had a YouTube channel, and who have like, we followed you into this amazing new career. And I think it's just very beautiful and gratifying for people like me and people who like have followed you like me to see you come back now from where you are in life and where you are in your career. And I think also for the fans who don't know you from then, it'll be just a really beautiful new door that you're opening for them to get to know you in like actually quite a fundamental way, even though it'll be quite new. What was it like when you decided that you would do this? And then what does it mean now to be able to do it?
So I think it started with just sort of sitting with myself and sort of like my body of work in front of me during the pandemic. Throughout lockdown, I was just kind of in a very reflective space internally, I think. And I was just kind of evaluating every nook and cranny of my life, and just
for sure,
whatever, music included, obviously. And so I think I went on this like deep dive of my old YouTube stuff, because I archived all of the videos. I took them down when I started Nikki as sort of this like rebranding move.
Yeah.
And I realized I still very much resonate with all of these songs. And I was honestly like quite impressed with my younger self. I definitely feel like I've lost some brain cells since and dumbed down.
Same.
Yeah, I was just so I was just sort of fascinated with how passionate I was about kind of like writing, and just how I wrote was so completely different. Anyway, all that to say, I just felt very inspired, obviously. That sort of like planted the seed of, maybe one day, I don't know when, but someday. And then when Taylor's version sort of like started popping off, I was like,
this works. Yeah.
Started turning. And I think like when she put out All Too Well, the 10-minute version, obviously, it sort of like evoked this very familiar yet unfamiliar feeling in me. It felt like I was listening to a song that I have always known, but also at the same time like never heard before, because it's a new version. And so it's just sort of this like strange, rooted in the past, but also moving forward into the future, kind of like the hybrid feeling. And I was like, oh, that must be such an, I don't know, it was such an interesting feeling for me as a listener. And so on a whim, I sort of was just like, can we get a studio day? I just kind of wanted to like lay down a vocal and just a guitar, like an acoustic guitar track of all my old songs, and we'll just go from there. I didn't even have the thought of like, let's make an album. It was just kind of like, I feel inspired right now, so I'm going to do that for myself. And then here we are.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, so that's a couple of things that I just want to say, which is like, yes, the impressiveness of young Nicole. I think you mentioned in your announcement, you were like, young Nicole's music deserved to be heard and to be like platformed with you now. And I think it's so meaningful because listening back, I'd love to discuss your take on your songwriting back then, how like cerebral it was and really like literary almost. I don't know if any of that resonates, the descriptions where you were super like, the language was super precise and really like analytical. And I just wondered, do you feel like your songwriting has changed since then, and in what ways? And now getting to like listen back, how do you feel about it all?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. Like, even the way the album came together was really, it was a process. I didn't, unlike Moonchild, I didn't really have a set track list. I sort of was like, let's see what this evolves into. And so now the final structure is half of the first half is comprised of like all of these unheard new / archive songs. And so a lot of those, the writing style of in the first half, I feel like differs quite a bit from the second half, which is comprised of all the old songs. I think back then, like it was very metaphorical and it was very imagery heavy. And I was absolutely just like a total nerd. In my English literature class, that was like my favorite subject. And I was very much sort of like working my writing muscle sort of every day at school. And so I think that kind of transferred onto my music as well. And I was reading so much poetry and analyzing poetry and all this stuff. And definitely like have not been as diligent about that nowadays. So, I think my vocabulary back then was very rich and vast. But I will say now, as a 23-year-old, I sort of like look back on my style of songwriting back then. And I sort of like chuckle fondly at it because I think it's sort of like it errs on the side of like innocent pretentiousness, you know what I mean? Where it's just like you're 17 and you don't know any better, and you think the world is literally going to end because of this heartbreak, and thus you're writing, consequently you're writing this way. And so I think now I am very much, it's a much more blunt approach. I think back then it's sort of like the melodies were sort of like blanketed under this, not facade, but sort of just like a lot of metaphors, right? And then now I'm sort of just like, you're ugly when you cry. I'm just a lot more brutally honest now, I think. Not that I wasn't then, it was just kind of like a different kind of honesty, which is really cool. I really like the juxtaposition, I think, of the first half and the second half writing wise. And yet at the same time, it still feels very much me.
For sure. I wanted to ask you about like that divide. So obviously the second half is stuff that people will be a little bit more familiar with. That's like floating around out there, having been published on YouTube in some form before. And the first half is, I think you've mentioned some of it is actually still old, but just unreleased. Is any of it like you wrote it now and sort of inspired by that universe?
Yeah, so some of it, the first half is an interesting mix of archived songs and new songs that I wrote about that era. So it's definitely a blend of both. Yeah,
that's incredible. So one of my questions was, how do you feel like when you went back to revisit those old songs, what did you bring from current Nikki into those? And maybe when you were writing your current songs, what did you bring from old Nicole into it?
I think I tried to
tap back into that vocab.
Yeah, definitely. I tried to bring the emotion of it, obviously, but I think like writing retrospectively is always, I hate to use this word. I hate it because I know I'm 23 and I know like all the older people, but I feel like there's sort of this like mature sort of like a more mature disconnection from, you know, like whatever it was you were experiencing, you know what I mean? And so like writing retrospectively, I feel like I felt I was able to sort of like write in a more like honest, less melodramatic way, if that makes sense. I think the first half is a lot less melodramatic, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. And it could totally strike others in a completely different or the opposite way. But yeah, I think I just tried to embody sort of like the era and kind of what it represented for me, what it symbolized, without writing phrases like sonorous soirees. No, I know. I have a special place in my heart for like those songs. Like to this day, I love the fact that I wrote that. It's just like I would just never write that now. You know what I mean? But I'm glad that I wrote that then.
Yeah, you know what, the thing that made me like, now that we get this really beautiful opportunity to listen to like the various halves or the various parts of your artistry together and sort of like interacting with each other now, is you get this sense of like young Nikki was writing super like precociously. You know that lyric, that Taylor Swift lyric, it's like, how can a person know everything at 18 but nothing at 22? And it's like, you write like, you know, you just have this like command of the universe in your bedroom. And obviously now you know so much more, but you go like, now you write more simplistically and more like directly. So yeah, it's just great that now you've actually presented that juxtaposition to people. And I wondered, you know, that the way this sounds to a listener is almost like you hear someone going back to revisit their old journal entries or their old writing. Did you learn anything new about yourself back then or about yourself now? Like any links that you've been able to make?
Yeah. In track 4, I mentioned that I'm a type 4 Aquarius.
I remember that.
Yeah, I think like, you know, I remember I had a phase where I was like so obsessed with the Enneagram when I was 18, around the same era that I was writing like Oceans and Engines and all these songs. And then I sort of like left that behind. And then recently I sort of like read my type profile again, and I was like, so I haven't changed much at all. But I think like what I learned, like just sort of like revisiting everything about myself, it's just I love to feel like I truly don't mind it, you know. And I have some of my very best friends are the complete opposite, where they just like, I don't understand how you could, if you're sad, like focus on not being sad. And I'm like, no, it's the best part is feeling that, like the, you know, just feeling the gravity of how sad you are, how angry you are. So anyway, all that to say, like, I think I'm somebody that doesn't mind feeling emotions, and actually quite enjoy it. And I find like that my aliveness, I guess, comes from feeling. And I think that I try to sort of like, or I guess naturally, consequently, it sort of translates in my writing, I hope.
For sure. Yeah, lately I have been watching the Oceans and Engines music video, and I know I'll cry, especially when like the hands start and I already start crying, and I'm like, I love it. Like I'm literally like, inject it, like let me do it again, like let's run it back for sure.
Oh my goodness. I'm the same way. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So thank you for giving me so much like so many ways into that, like whether it's this or La La Lost You when I had my first breakup. Yeah, like I was like, it's so important, the work that you do to like give people this vessel to cry with. So that's
my purpose in life, is just to make people cry.
I wondered, so this album is obviously, like you mentioned, Taylor's from the Vault, Taylor's version. So this album is obviously kind of like a calling back to that old body of work, and instinctively it's sort of a different direction for you right up until now, but also 88 Rising, which is not intuitively singer-songwriter / acoustic focused. Maybe also because it's like very, very focused on getting Asian representation and visibility into these traditionally exclusive spaces like hip hop and rap and R&B. And it did seem like at the beginning of your debut with them, it was really R&B focused. So how does it feel now with you and also 88 Rising to be ready to take this sort of pivot?
What's so great about being in 88 Rising or within it, I guess, is that I have always felt like I had agency over what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I always felt like I was at liberty to decide where I wanted to drive the ship. And Sean, the CEO / my manager, has always sort of been my biggest cheerleader. I think at the start of like my career, I was definitely it was sort of like my coming of age, I think. I was writing all of these folk indie singer-songwriter songs on YouTube as a high schooler, and then boom, I graduate high school and I broke up with somebody my high school first love, and I wanted everything to rebrand, as you do when you're 18, right? And so I went the opposite direction, which is still, by the way, like R&B was also what I grew up with. It truly was. That was sort of like my first exposure to music. So I like through my mother. And so, I think I always carried sensibilities from both kind of like genres or spectrums, ends of the spectrum, I guess. And I decided to just sort of lean into R&B because I wanted to rebrand. And I think for the past 5 years, I have just sort of, what's so great, and I feel so blessed because I don't think a lot of artists get to say this, but I really like 88 Rising has just like allowed me to grow in my music and supported me through it. Throughout the past 5 years, I've never had anyone be like, really? I'm like, are you sure? They're just kind of like, yeah, do you. And I think I've just utilized the past few years to sort of figure out my sound. And I obviously, I don't want to speak too soon because again, like we're all ever evolving, me especially, like I just am such a sucker for every genre ever. I really do feel like that if I were to describe my sound, this record is it. I think I've just really found this like a sweet spot. And also just because I was so deeply involved in the production of this record, like the actual instrumentation and building each song. I just have learned so much and grown so much as a producer as well, which I think more so than any other record before. Yeah.
Incredible. So. That is like hard for you to say because you were already such a capable producer from the beginning. Like I remember when all of your first few songs came out with 88 Rising, they were either like one half produced by you or like See You Never and I Like You were pretty much your production too. So on that, I'd love to now get into talking about some of the tracks and the choices that you've made on them. Some of these lyrics were just like, I was just listening to them on the train and I was like, whoo, because some of them were just like, they were like hitting, like on Oceans and Engines, first of all, the production, obviously you've had the opportunity to kind of amplify it or like build it up from like a stem that you laid down when you were younger. So I felt like it was a lot deeper and a lot more kind of rich, the way that you've done the sound on this one. So talk to me about what tone you were trying to set. Like, obviously it started off acoustic with the guitar, but it was like almost Phoebe Bridgers like at the beginning. I just wondered.
Thanks. That's the highest compliment. I'm a through and through. I love Phoebe. I think, well, first of all, just completely like logistically and transparently, I don't have any of the original stems from all of my videos.
You just did it fresh.
No, those are all gone with the wind, along with my 2011 MacBook. And so, yeah, I restarted everything. And I also was just, that's how I wanted to do it anyway, was to restart everything. And that's where my heart was and how I felt inspired to do it. Yeah, you know, Oceans and Engines was really interesting because that was remember how I told you at the start of this interview that I decided to go randomly on I don't know, Wednesday night or something into the studio and just record a vocal and a guitar track. So Oceans and Engines was one of those songs that I recorded that night, where it was just the vocal and me playing acoustic. And then I was just going to produce around that. And so I sat with that demo for a long time. And then I sent it to Jacob Ray, who produced it with me. And it was like, this is great, but I don't hear, I hear something else. And then I was like, but I also hear something else. So I started with the bones of the what you hear now, you know, with this drum pattern. And then he actually made the decision to change it to be an electric guitar instead of an acoustic guitar. And I was like,
that's a game changer.
That's it. Chief. And then, you know, what was so funny is I was at his house and we were working on Oceans and Engines. We had designated that day. And I was just I think I was jet lagged or sleepy or something. I don't know, but I was very, very sleepy. And I fell asleep. And I woke up like 3 hours later. It was too long of a nap. And the song was done. And he was just like, you want to listen? I was like, you're done? He was like, yeah. I was like, okay. So then I listened to it and I literally sobbed because I was like, I have 0 notes. This is it. Like, this is it right here. Yeah. And that's very rare for me. Like, I am not a 0 notes kind of person. So yeah, right after I woke up from my magical, miraculous nap and it was done.
Incredible.
So, yeah.
Well, so on that first listen, it's literally like hearing it for the first time, living again, like with a second life. Right. What, you know, right. And so how does it feel hearing your own words, but like in a modern context or like today?
Yeah, I feel, you know, because when I was listening to the Fearless, Taylor's version, and then the Fearless record, and also Red, I felt very emotional as a longtime Swift. You know, I was like, oh my goodness, because like all of these songs, but her voice has matured. She's in her 30s. And as a listener, I was just, I listening back to my own re-recorded songs, I think I felt like a fraction of what I felt for Taylor. Because obviously there's all that self-filter of like, I don't know. But I definitely... it was very an emotional experience because I think I just sort of had this flash of like 17-year-old me who probably would have like done backflips just sort of like listening to this production. I also had this like realization that like, man, when I was 17, I had no idea how to produce a song, and then here we are, like, you know, 5 years later.
Well, I mean, it was very DIY for you. Like, I think you had a very distinctive style already back then, where, especially like coupled with the fact that you're also kind of your own video producer. I remembered very clearly you would have like the lyrics go up.
Yes,
and like you'd put little pictures, and you would have like you had a mic, and also just a very like, you had a style. And you know, you had to like set up your guitar at home and like light the fairy lights.
That's crazy that you know all of this. I'm shocked. That's awesome.
And it's just nice that like over the years, people have like preserved that online, so we can like revisit.
Right. True.
I wanted to talk to you about high school in Jakarta, which I think is one of those like, if you know, you know kind of songs, because it's a very specific memory that you're describing. And I think maybe other people who grew up in Asia like me may relate to parts of it, but it's like super, the specificity of it actually makes it quite universal in terms of what you're describing. So like, tell me what story you're telling on that. Cause it's like, it's kind of brutal, it's kind of like cutthroat, but also like loving.
Yeah, so that's the quintessential example of a song I wrote retrospectively. And so I wrote that more recently, about that era. And so I think it honestly started, the inception of the idea was truly just like, I had this thought that I wanted to have a song where I name dropped all of my best friends, because I just loved that Ariana did that on Thank You Next. And I was like, I want a song like that with all of my friends. That's fun. You know, and so, yeah, it started with that. And then it just sort of like naturally evolved into kind of being this like lament to my high school first love about our story, I think. And it kind of like narrates it from the start to the end, because that line about the Vespa line, that, like everything you hear on this song is a true story. Like none of the lyrics were made up. And so,
wow,
yeah, I really did. You know, I remember I sort of like revisited that feeling of being 15 and just like crushing so hard on someone, and then seeing that take somebody else home on their Vespa, and just, you know, yeah, so it felt very nostalgic, and just true. Like at the end of writing that, it felt like I had scratched an itch in my brain that I didn't know it did, if that makes sense.
You like went back in time to scratch it as well.
Yeah, and it was done, and like all of the words came out, and it's sort of like I was able to kind of like close that. I mean, not that chapter necessarily, but just like that portion of the story. It was one of those very like gratifying, satisfying songwriting experiences, and it was done very quickly. So yeah, that story was just about me in high school crushing on someone and then ending up with them and then not ending up with them.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think the lyrical tone that you strike on all of these is like really micro, like you're going into each moment and really like fleshing out a really clear picture. I wanted to kind of get your take on what kind of headspace were you in when you wrote Backburner and Facebook Friends, which are my favorites. I think they're incredible. They're so sharp. They're so like you catch everything that you want to say. And it like, I think it shows that art of like articulating the thing that you want to explain. You just like, when you write it properly and nail what you're trying to say, it's just so effective.
That's so funny, because those are two of my favorites too. Although honestly, I can't lie, like every single one of them are my favorites.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you chose those two, because Facebook Friends was an archived song, and
Really?
Yeah, Facebook Friends was archived. I wrote that. You know what's funny is Facebook Friends was the very last Nicole Zefanya video that I never published. It was like right there. It had been uploaded, and all I had to do was hit publish, and I didn't do it.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't remember why. I think I truly was just like, I'm going to publish this when I get home, and then I just never did. And so that was the last Nicole Zefanya video before I debuted as Nikki, which is so wild. And so, yeah, with Facebook Friends, obviously I wrote that while everything was still fresh. We had just broken up, and yeah, I really love that song. It sounds completely different to what it originally sounded like. And then Backburner is a newer one that I wrote retrospectively as well. That one, I feel like, again, has sort of this like detachedness to it, if that makes sense. But you know, it's not as in the moment, but like I love it. That's my favorite one, or one of my favorite ones. And I think like with Backburner, it's so funny because I was around one of my friends that was going through that exact situation, and it sort of like triggered all of these old memories of like, like not being prioritized by someone that you want to be prioritized by. And so I think sort of like reliving that experience just vicariously by witnessing sort of like what my friend was going through. Backburner Turner sort of like just came out really naturally as well.
Mhm.
And
that's such a like Taylor Swift writing about Abigail on 15 type of vibe.
yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm gonna write this for you.
Yeah, no, it definitely was a mixture of like writing it about sort of loosely inspired by her, but also I wrote it definitely for myself. And
Incredible.
yeah, that was inspired by college. When I went off to college, I remember just cursing whenever Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls would come on my Spotify playlist, my Spotify shuffle. I would just be so upset and just like skip it, so angry, because that was our song. And
yeah, classic.
And I absolutely had to shout out the Goo Goo Dolls because they were pretty formative in sort of like my first love.
Yeah, no, but it's so, when you do that, it like really takes us all back to that time, because, you know, Google Dolls is like, when you hear that, you're immediately like, oh, I know exactly where I am, how I feel, etc. On the subject of publishing, Facebook Friends is your last video. I'd love to talk about the way where you were in your life when you like were building your YouTube channel and how you made it up, because it was such a like rich time on YouTube where like I remember gaining so much inspiration from people like you and Dodie and everybody in that. Yeah, like you, when I would like see you and Dodie talk to each other, I'd be like, whoa, this is like kind of a crossover. It was just like, so and like just that being a young girl online at that time, I think is something that I'd love to get your like experience of, because obviously you were active and doing things and really building that culture. And it was so like out of your bedroom. What, you know, were you kind of doing it like on weeknights, weekdays? How are you doing this?
Yeah, I definitely like did not have a schedule. It was just whenever I felt inspired. And I think that's interestingly, like that's also how I am inspired by my past self, was whenever like whenever I just felt this like tiny stroke of like inspiration, I would just go do it, you know, which is like not at all my style now. I think I sort of like sit on things. I was definitely just a very like, I mean, I think that era was just so, I don't know, like inspiring. YouTube was very different culturally, I think. And just sort of like the content that was being made was so niche and specific to that time. And I just was so, I wanted to be a part of it, you know, and I felt like that was how I sort of expressed and developed my individuality as well, because, you know, I went to a Christian private school. Everybody wore uniforms. Nobody was allowed to, you know, dye their hair, have piercings or whatever. Just, you know, just your stereotypical ways of expressing yourself was not allowed. And I think music was sort of that way for me to do so. I was just truly just interested in that and in writing. And so YouTube, that era of YouTube truly just sort of opened the floodgates of inspiration, and just sort of seeing other, you know, other creators my age from all over the world, and like I could connect with them because all I had to do was just send them a message or just drop a comment on their YouTube or their video, and they would respond. And it just felt, I think that was the first time where my little Jakarta bubble started to feel like it was growing a little. And I sort of had my first taste of just kind of the world outside of my little, you know, room, even though I know that kind of sounds like a paradox, or, you know, an oxymoron, because I was in my room while I was doing all this, but it definitely made my world feel bigger. And I think it just sort of, was a very formative experience, I think. And I wouldn't take it back, obviously, because otherwise we wouldn't have Nicole.
For sure. So, and like, how was it received when you would like go to school, and obviously you'd have posted something the night before, or like with your family, and what was it like bridging that?
You know, what's so funny is that I'm realizing now that you're asking me, because no one's ever asked me that before, is nobody talked about it. Like no one acknowledged it. And I think in a way
aware of it.
They were aware of it. Oh yeah, there was absolutely an awareness, and I know that they spoke about it, like people spoke about it within themselves, but never to me. Even in my family, it would just be kind of like my mom sort of being like, "Oh, did you like post a video?" Like, yeah, and then that's it. You know,
and then
and
even as it got bigger.
Yeah, even as it got bigger, it was just not really talked about, because I think there was, it's funny is that now that I'm talking about this, I'm realizing that I think that the reason is there was this assumption that it would go nowhere, right? And I think it sort of like lived within me too, and that's why I didn't really like speak about it, because that wasn't serious, and the serious thing was to go to college. And so I'm not, like my YouTube channel was not at the forefront of anybody's minds, mine included. And it's just, but yeah, I think part of why it made it so cathartic and exciting for me was because of that, because of it wasn't a secret, but like it was just sort of like, yeah, nobody talked about it. And I think in a way it was my way of, I don't know, I guess proving something to myself, maybe more so than to others. And
Yeah, incredible. Like I just remember like being on YouTube at that time and being so inspired by people like you with the way you were writing, and also like I could really relate to this because you were very clearly like doing it late at night, like in your room, presumably like coming back from dinner. And I was like into trying to make covers and things, and I would like learn different things from different people like you, and like community channel, like editing 3 versions of myself into the same thing. And I just thought like it's specifically like early 2010s YouTube was like the time to just try, and it didn't need to go anywhere, but it could also have been everything. And it's just amazing that you've like grown out of there. And one question for the fans is, did you consider putting Little Souls on this album?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I did. I actually recorded it.
Wow.
Just the vocal and the guitar. It was one of the songs from that night that I recorded Ocean Dungeons as well. But it didn't make it, only because I think, I had to, initially I really was probably going to put all of the songs into, the record was just going to be all of those songs and none of the other ones. And I think I just realized like, well, I love Little Souls. It still has a place in my heart, but it's just not it's not the same tone. I think it doesn't sort of feel like it fits within this specific universe, but we'll see.
Yeah, you've done it once. Now you could do it again.
Who knows what's going to happen? I'm not saying this cryptically. Like I genuinely, given that I've been doing this for so many years, like things could very well change in like a few months, where I'm like, hey, by the way, dropping Little Souls. I don't know. I don't want to like plant that seed though.
When you drop it, I'm going to take a day off work. I'm actually going to take a day off work and just like lie there and listen to it. So is in similar vein of like what's possible, what's not possible. Did you like delete your YouTube channel entirely, or is it just like chilling? Is it just under the covers?
It is. I don't know if I want to reveal this. No, I can't. It's chilling. It's chilling.
Okay. Good. Like
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not somebody that has the heart to just like delete something. It's like a mini time capsule. It's a remnant of that era. I could never just say goodbye to it forever. So don't worry, it's chilling.
Okay, good. Because as long as it's not like in the ground, then just let it lie.
I could never.
So just to wrap up on what's coming next, and so that we're all prepared for all the stuff you have in store, you're going to be going on a massive tour, headlining tour of both the States and parts of Asia, which is so meaningful. How are you feeling about being at the helm of your own tour now, and with this content especially?
I can't tell you how deeply excited I am, and also just how it's just such a joy. And I truly just feel so much gratitude that everything panned out the way it did. Because I'm just so, I can't explain to you how awesome and full circle it is to be touring this record out of all the other ones. And I truly believe like everything happens for a reason.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. And getting to do like a home, taking your album around like parts of your home is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've been on the road before. I've opened for other acts, and I've learned a thing or two from them, and just kind of watching how they command the stage and how they conduct their tours. And just so excited to do it for myself. Yeah.
Do you think they'll be crying? Will there be like a crying section of your tour?
I don't know. I mean,
it'll be hard
honestly,
not to if these are the songs.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if that occurred. I'd be like, yeah, this is pretty on
Get the lights up kind of thing. Like it's gonna have to be one of those.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also speaking of learning how to like command huge stages, congratulations on Coachella.
Thank you. Thanks
how
so
was
much. It was, man, it was an experience, let me tell you. The 2 weekend format really just threw me in a loop. I was kind of like, because the adrenaline rush of just doing a big show, you're done and you go home and you're like, oh, I have to do it all over again next weekend. But it was great. I learned a lot. That was the first Coachella I've ever been to, like, period. And so it was a lot of fun. My whole family was there, all my friends were there, and so it just made everything awesome.
Big flex. That's the first time you've ever been. Is also like you're on stage. And just in terms of like what that meant, obviously it's such a big milestone for like the Asian community and the Asian females community. And you're one of the first few, if not the first, like Indonesian artists or artists from Indonesia to play that kind of venue, that kind of stage. How did it feel doing that?
It felt so surreal. Like I've said in interviews before that I process things quite late, and honestly, even to this day, I don't know if it's fully settled yet, because I mean, it really does feel like that was just yesterday that I did that. But yeah, man, I'm just so grateful and honored that it was me that did that, and I was just grateful to be amongst an amazing lineup, and just that I got to do it at all, period. It was a really awesome experience. Yeah,
incredible. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nikki. We've been so grateful to have you, and so excited.
Oh my goodness, thank you, Julia. So great talking to you.
And we can't wait for the album and the tour and just to follow everything that comes next. So thank you so much.